Hello and welcome to this ISM Trust webinar on music curriculum resources. I'm Ruth McPherson, the ISM's Head of Charities and Services. And to describe myself for the benefit of those with visual impairment, I'm a white woman with brown hair and I'm wearing a blue t-shirt. I've got a headset on and the ISM Trust logo is up here behind me. So before we begin the webinar, I just have a few housekeeping things to note. Please do introduce yourselves to your fellow attendees in the chat box and let us know your role in music and where you're joining us from today. Please also feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer these at the end. And do keep an eye on the chat box where we'll be dropping in some useful links as we go. And if you experience any technical difficulties, let us know in the chat box and we'll attempt to resolve them. And if you wish to use them, subtitles are available to enable at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded and we will share the recording with you afterwards, as well as a feedback survey, which we'd be very grateful if you would fill out. It really helps us to improve our services and events, so thank you very much in advance for that. And now today we're talking about music curriculum resources. So there are a wealth of resources available in the UK to help music teachers save time and to give you the flexibility to adapt materials to suit your pupils and your own curriculum and context. Some are free and some come with a cost. And at the ISM Trust, we've produced free frameworks for curriculum, pedagogy and assessment in music education for both primary and lower secondary schools. These are accompanied by wall charts and they can help you plan and assess musical learning in your classroom. They can also be used in a number of ways for individual lessons, for medium-term planning, and for long-term planning and supporting and evidencing children's musical learning and development over time. The ISM Trust also has produced free primary music resources, including the award-winning Primary Music Toolkit and the Primary Singing Toolkit, as well as Breaking the Singing Barrier, which is aimed at both primary and secondary schools. In terms of other free resources available out there, there are BBC resources such as BBC Teach, BBC 10 Pieces and BBC Get Singing, plus resources from Oak National Academy and organisations like Aurora Orchestra. In the primary sector, paid curriculum resources include Charanga, Kapow Primary, Sing Up, Out of the Arc and Music Express. These provide complete schemes of work, lesson plans, videos and assessment materials. Music Education Solutions offers a range of paid curriculum courses, resources and events to both primary and secondary schools, as well as consultancy and curriculum development services, helping schools create or improve their own music curriculum. And in secondary, Charanga offers digital composition, sequencing and performance activities. And Music Department Resources is one of the few platforms designed specifically for Key Stage 3 music, which we're going to be hearing more about shortly. So to tell us more about music curriculum resources, I'm delighted to be joined today by music education specialists Simon Toyne and Liz Dunbar. Simon Toyne is Executive Director of Music at the David Ross Education Trust, leading an award-winning music programme reaching more than 14,500 pupils across the East Midlands. Simon has helped shape music education nationally through his work on Department for Education expert panels and as former president of the Music Teachers Association. And Liz Dunbar has more than 30 years' experience leading music departments in state secondary schools. Her experience in curriculum design has led to collaborations with multi-academy trusts, schools, and the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain. In 2024, Liz left the classroom to focus on consultancy and launched the teaching resource website Music Department Resources. So I'm now going to hand over to Simon and Liz, who will take us through their presentation, and then we'll have some time for some questions. So do keep popping those in the Q&A as we go. Now, without any further ado, over to you, Simon and Liz. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And to introduce myself, I'm wearing a white shirt. I'm a middle-aged white man with some grey hair on the side. and glasses, and I'm joining you today from Skegness, where I'm visiting one of our schools. And Liz is joining us from York.
Yes, and I'm a white female in a black top, and I used to have ginger hair, but it's rather on the grey side now, and I would say the top end of middle-aged.
So we're looking particularly at Key Stage 3 resources for today, and we just want to place this in context before we start. There are some slides that are about to appear that will illuminate this. Key Stage 3 is not the forgotten key stage, but is the engine room of the curriculum. We both believe, as I'm sure everyone tuning in today believes, that the classroom at Key Stage 3 can be an incredibly powerful site for really deep musical learning. And in schools, of course, in secondary schools, we remember that there are three ways in which musical learning happens. The classroom, which is for everyone. There are ensembles and instrumental and vocal tuition, often called co-curricular, and musical events and opportunities, often referred to as enrichment. And these three areas, when fully functioning at schools, create a really vibrant music education. And this is featured in numerous ISM publications, particularly those by Kevin Rogers. We've also got a number of different ways in which we might frame the curriculum. Ofsted's recent report talked about two pillars. These pillars are represented from above here. The technical, namely how to control sound on a voice or an instrument, or the elements of musicianship and theory. The constructive, how music is put together, whether that's to do with creating compositions or creating performances, and the all importantly, the expressive. How does music convey meaning, and how do we as musicians express our musicianship? That's one way of looking at it. We're also going to look here at a model that came from Kevin Rogers with musical understanding as the overall aim of the curriculum, supported by music making and music thinking. And all of this is contained in those great ISM resources that have been referred to already. Kevin's detailed work on musical understanding and the brilliant framework for curriculum pedagogy and assessment from Martin Fortley and Abby Daubney. But Liz, I'm going to ask you some questions this afternoon. And when we were coming up with this session, we thought about what the key challenges might be for constructing a Key Stage 3 scheme of work, because it's all very well and good having these very, very helpful documents to support us, but we need to be honest about this as teachers. Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Repeat the question for me.
The key challenges.
Key challenges. Right. So when I talk to teachers, one of the key things that I find is that at Key Stage 3, teachers are still quite concerned about teaching composition. And that I think that stems from, as you have often said, how many of us are composers as teachers, how many of us that was our the way that we came through higher education or even in secondary music. For a lot of people, teaching composition feels like it's something that maybe is supposed to be innate or inbuilt. And I'm a great believer in, no, we can teach composition, and it's just a matter of the stages and the steps along the way in which you do it. Then it's making sure that we're not separating making in sound from what some people might call music theory. Everything's got to happen for me through sound. So you're discovering how music works, how language connects to sound, how notation connects to sound by making it and through exploring it. And then finally, what's happening in the classroom? How do you make sure that there's some kind of quality going on? And that's not trying to say that there's some kind of like perfect answer where I was chasing or some perfect sound where I was chasing, because quality music making can also be part of that discovery, that messy play, but it's got purpose.
That's right. And children know when what they're creating sounds good, don't they? So this approach, these key challenges that we've got here, Liz, you've put together through the resources that you've created on this website, and these are designed not just for those who are just starting in the classroom, but for all of us. I've got at Dret a number of hugely experienced heads of music who, when we've come together to develop this curriculum, have found that their Key Stage 3 teaching has been incredibly enlivened because they're resources that have purpose. And I can say that, and you probably can't because you're too modest about this. So what we're going to look at is how we approach this Key Stage 3 from a holistic approach. This isn't about we're going to have a listening lesson, there's a composing lesson, and a performing lesson. It's all, as you've said, about handling sound and developing an understanding of how music works. And how music works is not just how music is put together as a composition, but how we make music with each other, how sound is made, how sound conveys meaning, as you can see through this. Would you just like to talk to us a little bit about that diagram that was just up there?
Sure, I'll go back to it. It's really, I've got loads of stories of people that I've spoken to in the last 2 years, people I've never met before I started Music Department Resources. And I'm still amazed by the range of experience of teachers, of what they find in Music Department Resources that has I don't want to say changed their teaching, but maybe enriched it. And also given some people just a little bit of kind of confidence to say, oh no, this is all right, I'm heading in the right direction. And a lot of it comes from, I was talking to a teacher last week, and she'd been out of teaching secondary music for about 15 years, and she was just coming back into it. And she said, oh, it looks like nothing's changed. And I said, go on, talk to me. And she said, well, everybody's still doing Paco Bell's Canon, An Ode to Joy. And I said, when you say doing, tell me what it is that people, when you say doing, she said, well, playing it, and then you give a mark for it. And I said, right. Okay. There's a lot more that we can do with this than simply play it. And also, we've all come across plenty of musicians where you can say to them, right, great, let's sort out the phrasing in this, say, performance, or the intonation here, or you've dropped tempo there, or whatever it is. But when you actually ask them, so what's this piece of music about, or how is it shaped, or what's influenced it, or what's happening here, where does it modulate to B flat? A lot of students go, well, I don't know, I'm just playing the notes. So this is, I've got technique and I can play the music, but I know actually nothing about it. And I remember that from my own days as, learning as a pianist, learning all the way up to 18 and beyond into a degree, and knowing very little about the music. And it's not until you get into the classroom you go, right, what are we actually going to do with this? Because there's got to be more to it than just playing the dots.
Exactly. And you're talking there about the classroom there for us as teachers, refining our musicianship and discovering how music works. And that's really important, isn't it, for the relationship that we develop with the students?
And up until the day I left the classroom in 2024, I kept changing how I was teaching. I kept changing. I was even changing at my year 7 teaching in the last term of my 32nd year, and saying to myself, why did I not think of this sooner? Oh, flipping heck. I wasted loads of time having not thought of this approach sooner. And I found actually exponentially in the last couple of years of teaching, my teaching got better and better and better at Key Stage 3 because I was thinking about it more deeply. And as I thought about it more deeply, then I got the bug and I wanted to do it more and discover more about how I could, what I could draw out of students. And at no point did I ever think, oh, not this again, or feel like I was repeating anything. Because, of course, let's say if you've got, 8 year 8s that week, every single bunch of students is different. The dynamic's different, the speed is different, the needs in the classroom are different. And so it's that learning to flex and really think about things. And instead of saying to students, oh, no, you've got that wrong, I kind of got to the point where I was going, God, I can see why you might think that. let's just unpick why that is and just stop the lesson and take apart why students might say, oh, is that the minor note? And you think, well, where's that come from? This is fascinating. Let's find out why you're thinking that way. Not to slow things down, but actually to find depth and to find for students more an actual understanding rather than a going through the motions.
That's brilliant. Now, I know that the people watching and listening are going to say this is very good, but we need to see some resources. So you've mentioned about the depth and that this happens over time and that repetition is really important. That listening process is actually at the heart of all music making and all music education, isn't it? We learn to listen just like we learn to taste. And the more we repeat in an informed way, the more our music making and our musical understanding develops. We're going to show in a moment how these resources will support a term's learning. But can you just talk, I think it's on the next slide, about what's in these resources for Key Stage 3?
Okay, so Music Department Resources is more than just Key Stage 3, but that's what we're focusing on today. You can see there all the other things that are there. And at the end of this, on the slides, I've got a link through to a kind of introduction to. So when you get your notes through from this session, you'll be able to have a look at that. But what we're going to look at for Key Stage 3 then is these are the things that are currently on the website. And I'm writing all the time, I'm refining all the time, and I'm adding new resources all the time. And in fact, only this morning, I've just kind of completed student notebooks for teachers to be able to download and edit and use as part of their own. If you're a book department and you like a book, I mean, you could be a whiteboard department, you could be a paper-free department, you might like to print for the year, you might like to print for the term. But if you're a department that likes a bit of paper to scribble on, then the booklets might be useful to you. But yeah, what's it got here then? So Key Stage 3, it's got a fully resourced Key Stage 3. Everything's there, all the do now tasks, all the listening is embedded. Plus, you've also got everything that you would need for assessment. So the formative assessment tools and a little summative listening test. And I love the language now that a lot of people are speaking about how, you know, formative assessment is king and summative assessment is just to check your own teaching has worked. That's all it's for.
Yeah.
And then there's homeworks to support all of that. And then there's also, because we're all trying to do not just the classroom job, we're all trying to do running courses, running all the VMT stuff, running events, getting students out of school. Sometimes you need a little bit of support with a cover lesson, because I know that thing of you try and find something to use and you say, I can't leave this with students. Whereas what you'll get here with MDR is everything is linked through sound to the learning of that unit as well. So you can kind of trust that you can hand over the cover lessons to a non-specialist. And because I designed them with a cover manager and she tested the things out for me with lots of different cover teachers, we found something where a non-specialist could use this, not from what I think is right, but from the partnership of working with her as well.
Okay, now let's have a look at the structure of a scheme of learning. We've worked together on the principle of each term, by which I mean a full term, housing a unit of learning. And that this unit of learning is about developing their musicianship. It's usually housed by a genre or an idea, but we don't teach the blues to teach the blues, for example. We're teaching the blues to develop their understanding of the relationship between melody and harmony and expressive dissonance and structure and the way in which repetition and contrast develops a greater sense of musical depth and how that's expressed within the culture as well. But it's housing musical learning. And the way in which we've shaped this is looking at these two halves of terms, with the first half of term, if you like, discovering and feeding this journey of music and sound, and then the second half of term, applying that through a more extended practical task. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that process? Particularly, I mean, you've already mentioned about formative assessment is king, and that's certainly what we see in every lesson in that first half, isn't it?
Yes, and in fact, it continues, I think, through the entire thing.
It does
So
indeed.
for
I fed
like
you the line there.
14, yeah, 14 weeks, let's say 7 and 7 either side of a half term, the kind of the formative process is there all the way through this, and like the summative thing isn't the kind of like the be all and end all by any stroke of the imagination. In the same way that I'm sure a lot of you will agree, when you do a performance of something to the audience, that's the artifact, that's the most important thing. But we know from running choirs and orchestras and casts for shows or whatever it is, and doing festivals, that how students grow during that process and the camaraderie and the community that forms, that's it. That formative process is what shapes them as young musicians.
Mm.
So you know how when we're learning an instrument, and most of us here have started at, say, a fairly young age learning an instrument or using our voices and being trained, we have to practice to stand still. So you can't, if you stop practicing, and you'll find that things start to get rusty. So we have to practice even just to stand still. So there's an awful lot of repetition, but just moving on, just little bit by bit. And a lot of this discovery process as well is I will ask questions in the schemes where students will know, let's say, half of the language, but the other half of the language is brand new. But instead of me saying, oh, this is what this means, now go and write it in your book or memorize it or something, it's through doing things that you find out what things mean. And then you actually see the purpose of those things. So let's say instead of saying syncopation means this, it's now go and syncopate those chords. Right, what does that feel like? And once you've experienced it, that's not going anywhere. Like a shuffle rhythm, or like a syncopation, or like playing in triplets or playing cross rhythms. Once you've experienced it, it never goes away. So the discovery part is, yes, we're doing a lot of repetition, but just moving everybody on just a little bit so that confidence grows, but also skills and knowledge and application grows.
So that first half of term, if we just move a couple of slides on, what we're trying to achieve through this is to listen, to analyze. We're discovering lots of different repertoire. What you said about working things out in sound is so important.
It really is.
And they're working with each other. That sense of practicing and rehearsing is a vital musical process, as is the messy play, which I know we're going to come to later. You've mentioned that as improvising, extending, and developing. And then this second half of term, where it all begins to coalesce, the second half of term, they're applying their knowledge and they're reworking, refining, they're arranging, performing, analyzing. And how we structure this is through, well, if we go on to the next slide, this ingenious device that you worked out at Huntington, which is the ladder. Now, if I might explain this as a punter, and I've seen this work in a large number of schools, what happens is the children, all the pupils, start on that lowest rung. It's something that they can all do, and they gradually move their way up to the top. The top will usually be some kind of complete composition, but it doesn't matter if they haven't got there, because what they will have done will also be complete, and they'll be working as a class at different points in the ladder, which means that the classroom then becomes a really musical space where you've got paired and group work, and you're able to float between the different groups, and they start thinking as musicians, don't they?
See, with the ladder thing, do you know, I started this at Cottam 22,
Yeah.
25 years ago, and just got it off the ground. And then when I came to Huntington, I did 20 years of kind of like refining this method. And what it is it's that thing of, there's room here for students, let's say, with poor working memory, to be able to get a couple of rungs up the ladder after a few weeks and feel like the progress has happened. They can see it and they can hear that progress happening. The vast majority of the students will make it into the middle, halfway up that ladder system. And then some students who are either working really, really hard or may have like external knowledge, say from learning an instrument or having singing lessons or being in a choir externally. There's something for everyone. So it's almost like the top of the ladder as well. I always depict them with an open top. I never put a lid on it, because I found that I would be writing some ladders at Huntington and I'd have to do a flip side and do a B side for some of them, because some students would be just like flying up there and you'd just go, right, what next? We've got to write a B side. So there would be a flip side to the ladder and it would be twice as long. But the idea is that as you come into the second half term, I would model the first steps at the start of the lesson very briefly, 5 minutes after a do now task and some bit of oral training and getting everybody thinking like a musician again. And then say, right, everybody feel happy about going to giving that a go. And if you don't feel all right about it, that's all right. Stay and work with me. Vast majority of students would go off and I would run a little kind of like triage help corner. And then students might stay with me. And then I might say, how do you feel about go and have a go at that? And they go, right, okay. Vast majority would say, yeah, let's go on. And then by that time, some students have already moved up the ladder and have achieved the first step. And that's when you stop the lesson, maybe 10 minutes in, and go, let's have a listen to where they've got to. Right, people who are there, you're now going to go and work with other people. As soon as you've done that, come back to me. I'm going to show you the next rung. So the room was kind of like 3 or 4 things would be happening in it at once, so that students were never held back, but also were never left behind. So if you need more dwell time on something, you stay there and I will come and support you, or other students will come and support you. And people can work at different paces. Then on the next lesson, I might start the lesson by modelling a rung that's further up, or a student could model that, and we could talk about the differences and similarities, and then students would progress at their own rate. And there was no kind of like, you've only been successful if you get to the top. It was, think about your pace. If over 5 weeks you have moved up 5 rungs of the ladder, that's a cracking pace. If you feel like, it's going to be 1 or 2 or 3, that's all right. And some students will like, I don't know, come back to school after 4 weeks of chicken pox. Instead of them trying to come into a lesson where they're kind of totally lost, they can go, right, I know where to start. I'll get them started, but they can then work from that place, rather than it being I'm lost and I can now no longer participate. You know what it's like when you've got 32 in the room and there's 2 students who have arrived. I don't know, there might be a new school joiner and there might be someone who's been ill for a long time. They can start at a different place and other people are not held back. It's that fluid.
So that's our overall structure. And I've got to say, I've been going into quite a few Year 8 lessons over the last few days in our schools, and I see literally every student there is understanding how this chord progression works and how harmony works. They're all doing it and they're all talking about it and they're all hearing it. And it doesn't matter if they haven't come up with a complete, whatever we mean by complete piece. It's the musical learning. Right. We're going to crack on through these 3 challenges that we started at the beginning, and then we're going to finish by looking at a typical lesson. Now, everyone gets these slides at the end, so I think you're going to take 2 or 3 examples about how these resources support the teaching of composing at Key Stage 3.
So what I've done is I've taken a slide from every single term of every single year. And when you look at something like that, you might look at it and you might think, there's no composition there. But where my thinking for Key Stage 3 in composition starts is, when you're composing, you're making musical decisions. So right from the start of Year 7, I like to ask Year 7 to take ownership of things and make some decisions. So, just asking students with a song is, how do you want to put this together now? Do you want to do it so there's a solo section? Do you want to do it so we're all singing in unison? Do you want to split the class and let's go half and half? Let's try all of those things out. And instead of going, you're wrong, this is what's going to happen, it's let's try all of these things out so that students build the confidence about making musical decisions, not left behind. Again, I'm looking at the Year 7 now, Unit 2. Are we composing? Well, you could argue no. But when you look at the instructions for this, the idea of then saying, right, I want you to add a tonic pedal to this, or a drone to this, or I want you to layer this and think about who's going to do what, who's going to sing the melody, who's going to drop in, say, a simple bass line, where are you going to put this tonic pedal? Let's try it low, let's try it somewhere in the middle, let's try it high up. It's the idea of thinking, right, we are working as an ensemble and we're arranging, and isn't arranging part of the composition process? Look at term 3. We're now starting to think about connecting melody with just this idea of the fundamentals of like harmony 1 and 5. Really, really simple. And while you might again argue, well, where's the actual composition here? When you think about writing a tonal melody, the connection between harmony and melody is, is foundational. How many times have you said to year 10s, just drop me a bass line in on that, and they come back with something you just think, no, have a listen. Have a proper listen. Does this actually work musically? So if we can start that training in year 7, students after a while, it will just really naturally fall into place, because they're saying, right, okay, this is something to do with the chord of F. Let's have a look at some of the notes in that first bar that actually connect. And you can also see how we're using notation. And while we've sung a line and we've listened to this and we've analysed this song, we're also starting to say, without me making a big fuss about that's a C and that's a D and that's an F, already the connections are starting to take place. Here we are now with a phrase from year 8, unit 1, and we're doing a comparison of a first and second phrase. And students have already looked at the first phrase and then we're looking at the difference. And what you're connecting here with is the first phrase ends up harmonized by chord 5. The second phrase ends up at the end being harmonized by chord 1. And there's a resolution back to the tonic. Though I'm not saying all of that detail in year 8 just yet, I am trying to get students to connect with the idea that phrases are like musical sentences. We can have questions, we can have answers. And isn't it interesting how the tonic comes into this at the end? So comparing things for the purpose of understanding how harmony and melody connect, because this is going to feed into melodic writing. Here, let's say from the blues that we talked about earlier, all we've got there is root notes from the absolute fundamentals of a harmonic structure. And we've listened to a Tracy Chapman song, and in it, there's a bass line that does exactly this. And instead of saying the blue notes are something that belong in melodic writing, it's listening to how the bass line's using it. And we're just looking at how there's the connections between adjacent notes or notes that are a third away. And again, it's about making the musical decisions as to whether you want to use some of them or you want to use all of them. And also, I quite like it when you do exercises where you kind of like overdo it and you gild the lily and you go, right, let's take this back a little bit, because actually you've put too much detail in. And it's about listening to all of that. And so by the end of year 8, we've now got things where students know how to pull a chord sequence together with the bass line and to write a melody. They also know about first inversion chords because we've looked at bass lines that descend by step instead of just by using the root notes. And you can ask a really open question like the one at the bottom there to say, right, well, what are we going to do with all this stuff? Let's start to put this together as a performance. Let's start to try things out as a group, because as soon as you start to do that and think vertically with bass and chords and melody, you're going to have to kind of like think about the spacing of these things. Again, I bet you've had year 10s where you go, oh, go on, drop that bass an octave for me, will you? Stick that, don't have the chords at the same pitch as the melody, stick that melody up an octave, or why don't we just swap it round? Let's put the melody in the bass. Why don't we just thin this right out and let's spread those chords, or let's space the chords and let's voice the chords in ways where they're not just stuck in triads in the middle. All of these kind of small steps as you go through Key Stage 3 help with that. Get to year 9, and it's this idea now of just taking notes from the core, which students are really used to doing, and this idea of now thinking melodically. So instead of like just having melodic writing, which is just a wing and a prayer, no, it's come from thinking about how it connects with harmony, with tonal harmony. And once you've got this skill, I always think of like early Picasso at this point, because once you've got like the painting skill, right, let's now start to think in the abstract, but you can see where it came from. So we can start to get into dissonance because we understand tonal harmony. Year 9 term 2, we're now starting to think, instead of harmony, chords, bass, with this minimalism unit, we're now looking at fragments. So using something like Terry Riley in C, we can see how little you need to start building texturally. And so again, this textural idea, when we say, I'm thinking about year 10, when they come to composition, and they'll be quite kind of reserved quite often about how many parts they might write for. And quite often young composers will kind of write for things that sit under their hands. But what happens if, let's say, music technology is your instrument? And what happens if you're a single line player? That vertical thinking doesn't always happen at Key Stage 3. So this allows students to kind of like work on layering, and the idea of like placing things in octaves, placing things 2 octaves apart, and starting to think kind of with depth at that point, like with year 9 term 2. And by the time you get through to term 3, we're thinking about counter melody and how counter melody works alongside melody and harmony and chords. And it's that lovely thing of, in like the classic golden section, final third, final quarter of a piece of music, in will come the most glorious counter melody in whatever genre you like, and it lifts the whole thing. So this is now that thing of, when you're structuring a piece, we've thought about it vertically in year 9, but now we're going to bring everything together from all 3 years, and we're going to start thinking about how we take the listener on a journey. And again, with composition, I'm back on GCSE again, because this all leads to this beautifully, is if you when students go, I don't know what to do next after 8 bars, or they write you a 64-bar intro because they're too frightened of getting into melody writing, it's that thing of going, right, no, we've got so many ideas here that we've built, that we know how to construct. Now let's start thinking about how we take the listener on a journey, just like a film. Where's the peak? Where's the moment where it all happens? How do we get there? How do we get away from it? So this is like the end now of year 9, of the places that we're kind of like, this is where we've kind of got to. And if you kind of like think about all those bits of detail that I'm kind of almost instructing here, like add a crash cymbal on the downbeat of the drop, this is in EDM. When you listen to it, that's exactly what it does. So all the models come from real pieces of music. None of this is done in the abstract. It's all done through models, through real pieces of music.
You mentioned there about melody, harmony, and texture, and you've structured this so that effectively the principal lens for year 7 is working out how melody works, the pull of the tonic. The principal lens for year 8 is harmony, how different pitches combine to create primary triads, and we're beginning to look at secondary chords as well. And year 9, texture, how this is applied. Now, I'm just looking at time here because I just want to make a point that the amount of musicianship that's developed through this is immense. There's a massive amount of material here, which you can take your time with, and it's all developed through sound. Liz, perhaps maybe take 2 examples of these next few slides so that we can have enough time to look at the process of a typical lesson.
Sure. Should we go year 7 and then do a year 9 one?
That'd be good.
Streams, yeah? This is, I think, year 7 term 1. I think it might maybe just be like lesson 2. And you might think, good grief, there's a lot of things here for lesson 2. But it's from this. Lesson 1 has all been to do with just like the idea of connecting sound through kind of call and response, rhythm and pitch. Really, really simple things of moving by step. And this is a great one for going, right, go and find me on a keyboard. We don't know how they work. We don't know where anything is. No, honestly, go and find me each of these 3 things. Just go and find them for me. And you can see how the similarity and the stepwise motion that's there. It's this thing of connecting students with, I kind of get like the orientation of the keyboard, how my voice works some of the symbols that might be used to represent these things. So I can give you my musical ideas with my voice. I can give it to you in sound on an instrument. I can give things names. And there's also some kind of like symbol shape thing here. So we're kind of, to begin with, just starting to connect with the language of in sound and also visually. I'll just flick through all of these really quickly and take us all, pardon me, all the way through to, let's say, here we go. This is like year 9, unit 2. And when you look at the questioning now for the listening and analysis, you can see that they are pretty much the type of questions that you'd get at GCSE. But all of this has come through the schemes. Really simple things like, is there a clear pulse? Students can hear that like from the start of year 7. Students can tell you like whether things are loud or whether things are strong or soft, whether things are loud or quiet. But like to be able to ask a question like, is the music diatonic? That comes from like 3 years, almost 3 years of training ears. And also like the idea of texture. When you're listening beyond the tune, a lot of students, when they first come to you without you having trained how to listen like a musician, will come to you and say, I like this song. And what they've heard is the lyrics. They haven't actually heard the melody or what's happening underneath it. And so this is that thing of training students, not just to hear the surface, but to dig into it and be able to pick out the constituent parts. And that training of being able to isolate not just elements, but also the layers is kind of where we get to by like this stage with year 9. And I'm, as you know, I'm really fond of as well mixing my genres, styles, traditions. And this bit of Ravel is from the EDM unit. And you might think, well, that's crackers. Why on earth are you listening to Ravel string quartet during something which is electronic dance music? It doesn't make any sense, surely. But the whole point here is we're looking at the breakdown section, and when you listen to EDM breakdowns, they are absolutely exquisite, because what you have to do is you have to get right into the detail, and it's delicate and it's fragile, and you've really got to lean in and listen and really appreciate what's going on, let's say with the panning or with the filtering. And the reason that the Ravel is here is for that very same purpose. I want you to really concentrate on what's happening, because it's not just a melody. It's not just a melody in harmony. When you look at the 3 playing techniques that are being used here, do I expect these students to know what the 3 playing techniques are? No. But someone may have a violinist in the room who will know about arco, that will we know about pizzicato. And yes, we'll have come across it a little bit through the listening through the 3 years. But then to bring in tremolo as well, again, we're now talking GCSE. And we're also talking about like the idea of you can vary music, not just through changing chords, not just through changing melody, but also through the way in which it's delivered, its tessitura and its timbre. And the timbre is being more than it's played by a trumpet. How about if we stick a mute in it? Changes everything. So it's about this idea of getting students to listen not to timbre in a let's say a style or genre orientated way, but just listening to it for its own sake. Yeah. And just listen that detail.
Listening to its taste is the thing, and being able to identify it, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
The other thing I'd just like to point out before we look at a typical lesson is the questions that are in there. There isn't an answer scheme provided with this deliberately, because the point is it's not a yes or no. It's to stimulate discussion.
Yes.
And is there a clear pulse? If the answer is yes, why is that important to minimalist music?
Yes. Yes, exactly.
That's really vital. And similarly with the clear tempo, the steady tempo. So you're asking musical questions, and they're the musical questions that we would all ask in a rehearsal or a practice session as well. Liz, it'd be good if we could, because I'm looking at time and making sure we have time for questions here, to talk through that typical lesson, which you've got here, which is from ground bass. We're looking at year 9. When it says lesson 2, that's just the sequence. It's not, you're not expected to cover all this in a particular lesson.
No,
It's your
absolutely
journey through
right.
it,
Yeah. And so basically I do a little overview at the start of the lesson, and then I start with the do now. And there was something you said earlier about this idea of asking questions.
Yeah. To make you think.
Yes, and also because I want to ask questions that you don't know the answer to. And it's really funny when you say to students, right, let's have a listen to this piece of music, just grab a pen and just scribble down what you think. And I'm not marking your book. I just want, it's just because if you forget your answers, if it's easy for you to close your eyes and have a listen, then do that. Don't bother writing anything. But if you can remember your answers, because I want to talk about this. And quite often students to begin with get kind of upset about the fact that they don't know the answers, don't know all the answers or all the words. And you go, no, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here, because honestly, in another 1 minute's time, you are going to know what it is. But I want us to kind of like think about it, and feel free to tell me the wrong answer. I don't care. Is it a test? No, it's not a test. We're moving your understanding forwards.
What we're trying to do is get them thinking as musicians when they walk into a music classroom from chemistry, or wherever it is, isn't it? And so this is all responding to sound. I'm just going to pick up one thing here before we move on, which some people might be thinking about. Hang on, are we really expecting them to know the chords in A major? Well, by the time it gets to this in year 9, actually, it's not difficult to do. And guitarists are doing this the whole time.
Yeah.
It's logical. And that is further connecting with the real world of music.
Yeah. And also, it's the type of thing where you go, if somebody goes, well, hang on, no, I don't understand this. This is where you'd park this moment.
Yeah.
You'd get up on your projector, you'd get up the chords, you'd move to a sound source, you'd play everything through, you'd get students to illustrate it, and you don't skip past and go, you're wrong. This is that depth and repetition thing. And it's also, if you think about it, this is ground bass. So what on earth am I playing at, having a Lady Gaga, and this is ground bass? Surely I should have limited myself to, let's say, art music or something like that. But it doesn't work like that, because this is picked up off the back of students having worked with chords in the 4-chord trick.
Mm-hmm.
So from the 4-chord trick at the end of year 8, they know what 1, 5, 6, and 4 is in about 4 keys. Because if we're just working with that pattern, but we're getting them to understand the portability of harmony, that it's not just C and F and G. If we move the whole thing to G, it's now G and C and D. What are we looking for in that chord of D that belongs to the key of G? So again, it's not about teaching, this has got 1 sharp in it, so it must be, G major or E minor.
Yeah. No, these are not abstract theory lessons.
Yes,
they're music in the real world. Exactly. So we've got this focus now, and note that this unit is ostensibly about ground bass, but we're not going for Pachelbel first. Right, we're looking at real world applications. Okay, so we've done that warm up. Then,
and so then the idea is taking a song, taking a piece of music that may be fairly familiar, and I update these on a regular basis so that there is a kind of like current. Something that they may have come across, heard. It's so the idea is we're now going to take something which belongs to an artist, belongs to a composer, belongs to a tradition, and we're going to recreate it. And we're recreating it so that we can get again this idea of for this particular piece of learning, when you look at those root position chords. As trained musicians, professional musicians, we know straight away that using those root position chords is going to be a lumpy old business. And so the next thing that we move on to then is the idea of inversions. So here come the inversions. So we're now working in year 9. We have come across extension chords. We've looked at voicing 2 and 2 with your left and right hands with the blues. But now we're looking at the difference that using inversions make. And so again, it's that thing of, when you're asking a question like, what difference does this make to the sound and how the chords sit under your hands? This isn't about there's a right answer on the next slide. It's different students will have different responses. Because again, you know that thing of when students are using keyboards and they will clonk around in root position chords, and you get more kind of like errors in placing things at speed than you would, otherwise. When you look at the kind of ergonomics of moving from that D minor second inversion to the F in first inversion, you only need to move one note. How delicious is that? And students really love this kind of like step of going, oh, why didn't you tell us that in the first place? I've been struggling from getting from chord 6 to chord 1 for ages. Why don't you tell us this in the first place? And it's that kind of like, we're layering up now. And have you noticed the difference it makes in sound? And it's that thing of when students play the same chords that they hear in a song that they know, and they go, why doesn't mine sound like it? And by this stage, you can now go, this is why, because this song employs inversions.
And then they can make it like that. And then we're developing now their confidence in using the same tricks that is there in the original song.
And also then how simple it is to write a counter melody that we can then layer up in. And again, I use this word, I use homorhythmic here, and I've never done any teaching on that word. But because of what's being asked, in other words, we're just going to sound these things together on the first beat of each bar. I've now introduced this word as well. And students are learning this language, not because it's on a list, but because it's part of what they're making in sound all the time. So, students could play this. You could never mention the word homorhythm. Students play this and you go, yeah, lovely illustration of homorhythm there. And students go, what does that mean? Because they've heard it in sound. Well, everything was placed together.
It's no dissimilarity between how they're learning about sport, is it? In terms of the vocabulary that's connected there, and then this exciting way of how this is applied to the ladder. Just talk us through this, and then I think we've got some space for questions.
Sure. What's great about this is a bit like the 4-chord trick with this ground bass unit. Yes, we do bump into Pachelbel and the 8 chords, but it comes at the end of say a series of 6-7 lessons, and we've been through Purcell, we've been through a load of songs that are kind of connected with the 4-chord trick from the previous unit. But Purcell beautifully uses 6 of Pachelbel's 8 chords. So we also look at something that's of the period, of the Baroque period, but isn't doing all 8, it's doing 6 of them on a cycle. We know that Purcell kind of like loves that kind of asymmetry sometimes with phrase writing. And so to kind of hear it in a 6-chord cycle is really nice. Here we shift back to 4. But if you look at, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4th rung up, try out a couple of the following. This is where students are going, when you look at that, you might think, well, how do they know how to do that? All of those things happened in at least one workshop in the previous 7 weeks. So they know how to handle the material. And that idea of like leaping octaves and tenths, you might think, well, I don't get, well, why would you do that? And it's because in one of the examples earlier, it does it to great effect. And it's something where students will come back to it as a remembered experience and go, yeah, let's do that again, because that sounded really great. That alternating thirds and fifths of the chord as well, it's that thing of, when you say, oh, break this up into a broken chord or an arpeggio for me. A lot of songwriters, composers will use either just the root and the fifth or the third and the fifth, because the root's going to sit in the bass 2 octaves away. And it's that thing of showing students how you create, not just it's the correct harmony in inverted commas or a melody that works, but how things are voiced. And that sophistication then travels into GCSE with them really beautifully.
Now, Liz, you've spoken extensively this afternoon, and it's all about music, and it's all about that deep connection and knowledge of repertoire that's born out of many years of experience. And one of the things that I know I've valued, and the teachers that I work with found, is the sort of supporting material here for each unit, saying actually these pieces of music, these songs or whatever they are going to feature, and there's also going to be some wider listening as well.
Yeah.
And the thing I really enjoy is showing that this is all cross genres.
Yeah.
So bringing into, this is a unit on EDM, and here we are. We've got the Rite of Spring, and we've got Bobby McFerrin and Corelli, as well as echt EDM pieces.
And it's that thing of instead of having a hierarchy of musical styles, traditions, genres, and in students' heads they've kind of got, oh, this is good, or that's good, or that's the other's good.
Yeah.
No, actually, there's only two types of music: good music and bad music. And everybody has their off days and everybody has their on days. It doesn't matter what tradition you're writing in. So I really like this idea of, okay, this piece of music has a fantastic crescendo and textural build. Well, that's great, because we get that from Strauss, but we also get that from, Avicii. And it's kind of, it stands independent of what your tastes are, because what we're doing here is we're learning through the techniques, we're learning we're learning through design and through making, rather than going, oh, this is this style of music and we're now going to study it whether you like
Exactly.
it or not.
And that's where this approach becomes more similarity has more similarity with, say, successful MFL teaching, which is, we don't bring a French person into a room at the beginning of term and say, right, speak, thank you very much, off you go, everyone. We're actually constantly doing it.
Yeah.
And we're listening and we're applying and we're questioning and we're getting, we're exploring the whole time, and we want the pupils to be bringing in examples of similar techniques and similar styles as well. We need to have some time for questions. So on the last couple of slides here that's just a reprise about how this is moving also into GCSE and A level, and with the cover resources and beautiful resources for classrooms as well. But then there's also a guide, isn't there, that is
so I won't bother clicking on the guide because it will take us away. But when you get your slides, if you click on that guide, it will take you to a page on the website where I've gathered all the free resources together, so you can look through a whole load of things instead of having to wade through all 300 resources on the website. You can see where the free ones are, and then you can decide whether it's the type of thing you might think, God, this would really help, for whatever reason.
Thank you for that. So that's a pretty exhaustive initial look at these great resources, which, as I said at the start, I've seen have really inspired the thousands of students that I'm responsible for at DRET, and equally the teachers. We've really found that Key Stage 3 music has been the place you want to go to in any school if you want to see really purposeful and joyful learning. And Year 9 has turned into the most amazingly productive places where you just see motivated children because there's a sense of purpose, and they're improving in every lesson as musicians and improve their musical identities because they've got things to do here and they're making it in sound. So now
shall I stop sharing?
That would be really good, because I know we've got some questions that have been coming in which would be good to address. So maybe Ruth could
Hi there, thank you so much,
give
both
us a
of
few.
you. Thank you for that presentation and that overview of curriculum resources and the website. It was brilliant. We're a bit tight for time, but I think we've got time for a couple of questions. So first one that we've had submitted in advance, someone said, it's my first time teaching Key Stage 3 and I've only taught primary before. What are the absolute essentials, in your opinion, for teaching effectively at Key Stage 3?
Liz?
Yep. Is everything in sound, and kind of start where students are, but have immediately really high expectations. Talk using musical language, use both the oral tradition and forms of notation right from the start, have everybody playing and singing right from the start, and kind of don't have lessons where you spend more than 5 minutes at the start of a lesson saying words. Get into sound as quickly as you possibly can. I'm a big fan of do nows, where you're on your feet, going to make it in sound, come in and sit back down again. 30 seconds later, show me your understanding because you've just made it in sound. I know a lot of schools have a kind of like silent rule for their do nows at the start. that's fine, but do it with pace so you can get into making sound as quickly as possible. Then don't leave students for 20 minutes doing things. Make things happen really, really quickly. And only once you've established kind of working practices and how the classroom is going to work, would you extend things to 10, 15, 20 minutes? Because it's that classic thing of doing your homework at 4 o'clock on a Sunday and, rushed. It's because you've been putting it off all weekend, not wanting to do it. Is no, bring them back sooner rather than later. And it never matters if things are right or wrong. I just want you to share what you've done with us. And even almost sometimes I used to do this thing with really nervous students of not even kind of like almost like looking or making eye contact, just concentrating on the sound and just going, right, that's great. There's loads of things we can learn from this. So it's moving quickly and it's moving musically and never standing still for long. They're the essentials for me to get going.
Thank you. We also had a question. Someone said this would be my first time using external resources, as I usually build the lesson material myself.
Yeah.
How would you suggest using resources such as these as someone who's not used to using someone else's lesson plans?
Right, okay, so what MDR is the slide packs, because they are Google Slides. You can't download them because they don't download well. You can download other bits and pieces for assessment and things, but basically it's kind of like a living book. So, imagine you've just paid, £7 or something for a few chapters of a book that you're going to read. It's the idea of, instead of it being a kind of theoretical description of what music education could be, it's examples of how you could take a piece of music, take it apart and teach all the disciplines through those things. So if you're not used to using other people's work, use it almost like a little reference book and go, oh, that's a nice idea. That's a nice idea. I'll weave that into my own schemes.
I would echo that. And just to say that the teaching that happens in the classroom is the relationship between the teacher and the students. The resources support that.
Yes.
So with any resources, it relies on your deep and increasing knowledge of the students' musicianship,
yeah,
and their developing musicality, and the way in which you bring them into the room and value them and nurture them and also challenge them.
The slide. And let's say, for example, in that first unit, the Building Our School Music Community, any of those single slides, they're the catalyst for that relationship. They're just kind of like things to have to hand to start that relationship, to start the music making in the room.
Great, thank you. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much again, Simon and Liz, for that great discussion of music curriculum resources and your overview of the Music Department Resources website. And thank you very much to everyone for joining us. I hope you found the session informative and useful. And if you have any further questions, please do email us on membership@ism.org. And please also fill in our post-webinar survey, which you can hopefully find in the chat. This will be emailed out to you as well in case you miss it, just to say that we really appreciate your feedback and it helps us to improve our services and events and make sure that we're putting on events that you value. The webinar recording will be sent out to you by email, and it will also be available to watch on our website. And we'll be sending you some useful links that we've shared during this webinar, as well as the slides from today. Our next event is on nutrition for musicians on the 29th of July. So please do sign up for that if you're interested in everything to do with nutrition. So finally, can I thank you again for watching, and we hope to see you all again at another ISM event soon. Thank you. Goodbye.